16. Dinosaurs. Months after the machine's announcement, John Blau was cleaning up a detail. It had to do with an interconnection between Eagle's CPU and another device. Looking through some documents, he came across the name of a cable that he'd never heard of before, and puzzled, he called to Halberger. "Hey, Ken, what's this?" "Ah," said Halberger, looking at the document. "That looks like a Tom West special." At that moment, Blau felt he saw it all. For the first time, he fully realized how many other groups besides his own had been brought into the project to perform large and little tasks, such as the design and fabrication of this cable. There had been a tricky little problem here, and this cable solved it. Though just a detail within a detail, it was crucial. There must have been dozens of problems like this standing between Eagle and the company's door, ones that he and the other recruits had never known existed, who had anticipated them and arranged for their solutions. It had to have been West. Blau knew that he could not have done that job himself. For that job, you'd need to know a lot, he thought. You'd need intimate knowledge not only of the CPU, but also of the company's entire product line. He tried to imagine how hard it must have been to pull everything together. As time went on, at least one other young engineer would have an experience like Blau's. He'd come across a problem and find that West had identified and solved it long ago. As for Blau, he had often wondered what, if anything, West did behind his office door. Now he stared at the document before him and he exclaimed, "Wow!" There really was, as West had often said, more to building a computer than designing and debugging a central processing unit. Someone had to dream up its general outlines in the first place. Someone had to make sure that the computer would work compatibly with the company's existing lines of peripheral equipment. Someone had to set goals of cost and performance and see to it that they could be met. These and many other items lay on the list of what West, often all alone, had accomplished. Although he had rarely confessed it to anyone in the company, West had taken a large gamble. "You have to believe in yourself enough to make some pretty outrageous statements," he had said, referring to his largely successful efforts at selling the virtues of Eagle. Secretive as a mother cat about the location of her kittens, West had masked most of his activities, including his worrying. He had once appeared to Carl Alsing as a mysterious stranger passing through town, and he really was that person, by constitution and preference a loner. He had never before owned responsibility for such a large project or for the performance of so many people. He had taken it upon himself, of course. Somehow, though, he seemed to have gotten it in his mind that he was responsible for things that he couldn't possibly control. The team had signed up to create the computer. He thought he himself had signed up to make sure that if they did their part, Eagle would get out the door and be a big success, and the team would be rewarded with stock and prestige and the freedom to play pinball again. Half the time, while sitting alone in his office planning and planning, he had imagined that total failure was imminent. Danger made life interesting, but anxiety gets tiring after a while. By late summer, West appeared ready for the project to be over, and it nearly was for him. Late in June, having rounded up supporters in various divisions of the company, he had for the first time formally presented the machine to De Castro at the meeting of executives called the Product Board. And while De Castro had not responded as enthusiastically as West had hoped he would, the captain nevertheless seemed to give the machine his laconic blessing. There had been a time when people with CB radios had been overheard in the vicinity of Westboro discussing the battle between the Eclipse Group and North Carolina. But nervous, invigorating talk of that sort had long since passed away. After the Product Board, Eagle was out of the closet and West slackened his public relations campaign. The machine had its own momentum now. During that summer, West suddenly remembered bike rides he'd taken with his father on Sunday evenings, and he found time to reassert that tradition with his oldest daughter. Suddenly, it seemed, he realized that his children were growing, and apparently he intended now to guide them on their way. He said one evening, "That's the bear trap, the greatest vice, your job. You can justify just about any behavior with it. Maybe that's why you do it, so you don't have to deal with all those other problems." I went sailing off Cape Cod with West for a few days in early August. On a morning that began with squalls and then became windless, we were heading out under the power of the boat's diesel toward the Buzzards Bay Tower, through a steep, unpleasant sea. Suddenly the engine quit. West stared at me with his mouth half open. Then he set his jaw and turned away. He disappeared into the cabin, and in a moment I heard some banging from below. A little later he poked his head up through the hatch and said, "Try it." No luck, it wouldn't start. West disappeared again. He again poked his head up through the hatch. He was holding the engine's manual aloft. This is a good manual. The only problem is it's not for this engine. Then he was gone again. More banging. Try it again. No luck. West's head appeared in the hatchway, reading from the manual. It is axiomatic that when a diesel engine fails while underway, that there is a fuel problem. He laughed, as if he had just read something funny. Again he was gone, and again he reappeared, this time to spit out a mouthful of diesel fuel. Finally, of course, he made the engine run. Back on land, one night shortly afterward, West told me that this incident was probably the closest I'd ever get to seeing him work on a computer. Then he remarked, "You assumed I could make it work. But I had never worked on a diesel engine before, and I was kinda pissed. I didn't think I could do it." I took it he was tired of playing the hero with mechanical things. Clearly, this was not the same man who would describe himself to virtual strangers by saying, "I can fix anything." West kept on losing weight. He was tired, and he was preparing himself for a large change. Nearly a year later, Halberger and Alsing were reminiscing about Eagle in a barroom, and Halberger remarked that what had happened near the end of the project reminded him of the typical conclusion of one sort of Western. A town hires a gunslinger to clean it up, but when he's taken care of their problem, he's still a gunslinger, and sooner or later, the respectable citizens are going to run him out of town. Alsing warmed to the analogy at once. Of course, that's a classic American story. When the new recruits had arrived, they had been told that the Eclipse group represented the very heart of Data General. The veterans who told them so certainly believed it. Their group, as they saw it, was the most dogged, hardworking, practical, productive, and dangerous in the company, a bastion of the old successful ways, a paradigm of the company as it had been when it was small. They believed in the rule of pinball. If you win, you get to play again, but failure is unthinkable, so you'd better let no one get in your way. Halberger's remark about gunslingers recalled some old scenes. I'm sitting in West's office taking notes when I look up and see West eyeing my pad from across his desk. He smiles. Then he reads my notes to me. In business, he explains, still smiling, you learn to read memos upside down. West is standing at his magic marker board, drawing a diagram of the company's hierarchy as it affects his group. There's some dogs and cats out here, he says. This guy is a non-issue. He draws a large X over someone's name. This guy disappears in time. Halberger sits at his terminal, sending out a bogus emergency warning message. Rezala goes thundering into diagnostics. West sits in his office and declares, "The only way I can do this machine is in this crazy environment, where I can basically do it any way that I want." When the Eclipse group started building Eagle, the management structure around them was extraordinarily bare. During the project, new executives were hired to fill the gaps. They came from other companies and did not know, of course, the odd, unspoken rules by which the Eclipse group played. The team's environment was changing, and the veterans felt it in small ways and large. Rezala complaining about a new rule that forbade employees from taking home-used packing boxes without going through the formality of getting a property pass. West in a traffic jam outside the plant one morning, muttering, "This is really beginning to make me mad. I used to be able to park at the front door of this company." One day Rezala, Halberger, and West were sitting around in West's office, voicing general agreement that beating people up didn't seem to get results anymore. Most other groups just didn't seem to be willing to put in lots of overtime on a machine anymore. Picking up a line from West, that the Eclipse group might be a dinosaur of a team, Halberger suggested that they order some T-shirts, which would bear the name Eclipse Group under the image of a panting Tyrannosaurus Rex. West and the other leaders of the Eclipse Group had acquired some enemies who would not mind seeing them taken down, and West got into a long-running battle, which heated up as the debugging approached completion. As he explained it to Rezala, West felt he was fighting to preserve the group's substantial freedom and to prevent a situation in which the team would simply be delegated to do certain jobs. Rezala said, "The real fun, the way you get an eagle out the door, is to get the guys to invent it, to come up with an innovative idea that's gonna make money. Once you've got that, there's no problem motivating people. Once we've got that, okay, baby, we're gonna do a hell of a job. And I think that's what West is fighting for." Rezala observed the battle with mounting anxiety and then with resignation. Most people, at one time or another in their careers as adults, reenact the molting of their adolescences. Rayzala liked to say that he spent his professional childhood at Raytheon, and that at Data General under West, he grew up. For a long time, he felt afraid that West would leave and that he would have to take over the group. But gradually, during many long talks with West, he became fairly comfortable with the possibility. One day in September, at a fairly large meeting attended by bosses from outside the group, West criticized Rayzala for some mistake. Feeling that he had deserved the mild rebuke, Rayzala wasn't angry. Afterward, however, West took him aside. West explained that he was being accused of criticizing other groups but never his own. That was why he had publicly rebuked Rayzala in the meeting. He was trying to prove the allegation false. He told Rayzala he was very sorry he had done it. West, Rayzala felt, was growing rather desperate, and it made him sad. At the beginning of November, Rayzala remarked, "The last 2 weeks I've had strange conversations with West. He's beginning to teach me the loose ends. I get the strange feeling I'm in finishing school." In retrospect, Alsing was convinced that West stayed around until the machine was safe from local politics. In November, West called the team together and told them that he was leaving them. He was going to that distant country, the upstairs of Westboro, to take another job, connected with marketing, a job that would take him often to Japan. Thus, he supplied them one answer to the question of what happens to computer engineers who pass 40. West said that Rayzala, Wallach, and Alsing would run the group now. He told them that their new projects were all lined up and assured them, "The fundamentals are right." He said he expected all to continue as before. Some people in the basement wore broad smiles that day, and many of the team's young engineers felt indifference. To the West loyalists, it seemed as though the earth had moved. In mid-November, West went away on a business trip, and Rosemary cleaned out his office. The last item to go was the clock in the oak case. A technician who had worked under West for some years got a cart and put the clock on it. Rosemary started leading him down the hall toward the elevator. Alsing saw them go by his office, and he got up from his desk. "I'll hold the clock on the cart," he offered, "in case we go over a bump." Rayzala joined the procession, and so did John Blau. When they got upstairs, they were lost. They had to ask directions to West's new office from some stranger in a suit, as Alsing put it. West's new abode was like his old one, narrow, windowless. They put the clock on the floor, and then they all sat down. Rosemary bustled out and in a moment returned. "You guys common?" Alsing said. "No, we're having a meeting in West's office." "It's our 3 o'clock Friday meeting," said Rayzala. Finally, they left. Going back downstairs, Alsing had the feeling he had just attended a funeral. "I visited West not long after that ceremony," he confessed. "I feel awful withdrawal symptoms. I wake up at 3 a.m., sweating, worried, and so on. It's a real problem becoming just an everyday Joe." But then he got up off his couch and lingered by his fireplace, a beer in his hand. "It's really tempting for me to look back on Eagle and bask in it now," he said. He made his long and went on. "Next question you gotta ask yourself, is that a trap? And the answer is, yeah, probably." On his coffee table, lying among heaps of magazines, I noticed, was a tall stack of books about the Orient. West was going to help show engineers at the Japanese company Data General had partly acquired how to build Data General computers. He was going to become something of a far-wandering engineer again. He was going to help launch Data General's invasion of the Far East. I thought that someone ought to warn them. West was grinning now. He was saying, "Japan, the Orient. Man, I could really get into building machines in Japan." West had risen from the small death of leaving the team. In departing, Josh Rosen had felt reborn. When I looked him up many months later, I learned that he had gone to work for another computer company and was defining the architecture of another 32-bit computer. He hadn't gone to a commune, except perhaps in a comparative, figurative sense. He was working 8-hour days and 5-day weeks, and he professed himself happy at last. Dave Peck quit Data General, discovering in the process that after having worked at the company practically since its founding, he was entitled to a pension. When he turned 65, he would receive the grand sum of $53 a month. Steve Wallach gave the speech he had once dreaded, describing Eagle's architecture to a jury of peers at a meeting of a society of computer professionals. And when he was done, they got up and applauded. "The ultimate reward," he said. But Wallach left the Eclipse group to work in another part of the company, and a year or so later he left Data General. As for Carl Alsing, he too resigned from Data General and took a job in California, at much higher pay, he said, but he added, "That wasn't why I left." Both he and Wallach had felt unappreciated by the company. In the project's aftermath, Alsing had most of his former responsibilities taken away. "I feel," he said then with a small smile rather like West's, "that I am free to go." Unquestionably, Data General was changing. For one thing, the company was falling on hard times. Not long after Gallifrey Eagle was wheeled carefully down the hall to software, Data General released a disappointing financial report, their first in many years. Profits were off. Over the next year and a half, the value of a share in Data General plunged, then rose, then fell again. More disappointing earnings reports were filed and speculation about the causes began in earnest. Business Week blamed DeCastro's style of management mainly, but appeared not to understand that style any better than anyone else. It did seem that the company had let some of its product line become outworn, and while there was no telling just what had been lost by not fielding a 32-bit machine sooner, it was clear that without Eagle, Data General's present troubles would have looked far worse than they did. I did not think Data General had the look of a doomed enterprise, but rather of one that was suffering harsh, growing pains. During this period, what seemed to be an unusually large number of people in crucial positions left the company. They included important sales personnel and several vice presidents, among them Carl Carmen. Downstairs, remembering that the Eclipse Group had once been called a strong foundation, one of the team asked, "If we're such a great foundation, who are we holding up?" For at least some of the old hands, the feeling that they had gone underground to build their computer had never been stronger. Surfacing, they found the company in apparent turmoil, and what they returned to seemed nothing like the hero's welcome that they had expected. Some of the problem was inward and inevitable. A number of the engineers confessed to feeling those long-anticipated postpartum blues. They spoke of feeling that empty spot. Some of the problem lay in the local political situation. In the aftermath of West's departure, psychologists came down to visit the team and handed out questionnaires. These seemed designed, one young engineer felt, to find out what was wrong with the group, and he couldn't understand it. Why were they being asked that question, given what the team had accomplished? As for the top managers of the group, they felt that they were under attack. That situation eased within a few months, but the effects lingered. For the senior managers of the team, the project had this bitter end. That far from feeling rewarded, they thought that they were being neglected and maybe even punished for what they had done. Obviously, the company didn't intend to produce such a sour finale, but clearly those in authority didn't take in timely fashion all the right preventive steps. Bitterness wasn't general or enduring. Many in the group got promotions, business cards, a few free trips, and though they were a very long time in coming, stock options. To their pride and delight, a number of the team's junior members got to participate in the publication of technical papers about the machine. Most important, many got to play pinball, in the sense that they went to work on those interesting projects that West had concocted and left behind for them. In the fall of 1980, the Eclipse Group was disbanded, and its members dispersed into several new and smaller groups. Some of the old crew mourned the team's passing. One said angrily, "It was a group that was formed and achieved this remarkable thing for the company, and the company has deemed to reward that group by blowing it up. It's really sad." Many others, however, shrugged. They felt that the group's demise had been inevitable on the one hand, and that it wasn't really dead on the other. After the reorganization, Ed Rayzala decided to leave Data General, and although the authorities tried hard to keep him, he finally did get away. He joined Alsing out west in California. West's chosen heir, Rayzala was the last of the old group's managers to leave the team, and so his going had the status of a milestone. West stayed with the company. He had never imagined that the rule of pinball would be a lie for his loyal lieutenants, and he had dreamed of the group perpetuating itself. It took him a while, but eventually he seemed to find for himself a workable attitude toward the departures of his friends and the team's demise. "Yeah, it's all blown apart, but the ethic's still in place," he said. "In some sense, spreading that around may be beneficial," West added. "It was a summer romance, but that's all right. Summer romances are some of the best things that ever happen.